I want to do a series until whenever I run out of stuff to talk about on this series of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy with Jesus Christ's birth. Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And so we're going to go through a lot of stuff in the next few days and weeks, but I want to lay it out so that you've got it. It's amazing to me the fulfillment of Bible prophecy in the birth of Christ, in the coming of Christ, in the life of Christ. And we'll begin in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. And this is where God is speaking, and he says, I will put enmity between you, he was speaking to Satan, between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. Women are never referred to in Scripture as having seed except in this situation. She was not going to give birth to a man-child that was the seed of a man. There was no human intervention here. This was godly. And so God says, and between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The bruise on the heel is not life-threatening. The bruise on the head certainly is. And so Satan is to be destroyed by this child who will become a man, and it is God who is sending forth his Son, the only begotten one of the Father. Now, there are billboards that have gone up in some of the major cities I've read about that declare that Jesus Christ is of some other religion or faith other than having been a Jew and the very founder of the Christian religion. That he was not the Son of God. That is ludicrous, of course. And anyone with any understanding of Scripture, any understanding of history, any understanding of the life of Christ, knows that Christ claimed to be the Son of God. And he claimed to be very God as well. I and my Father are one, he said. And so it was. And it is true that Jesus was the very Son of God. And so here the prophecy was given that the seed of the woman, that is Jesus Christ, would bruise the head of the serpent, that is Satan, and that Satan would bruise his heel. And of course, Christ was on the cross at Calvary, died there, was in the grave for 3 days, and came back to life. So his wound was not terminal, but Satan's wound will be terminal in the sense that it will be eternal punishment for Satan. Let's go to Galatians 4 as well when we think of this prophecy of the seed of the woman found in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Here, Paul was speaking in chapter 3 and in the beginning of chapter 4 about the relationship of the heir in a family who is a child. Until he becomes established as an adult, he's never more than a servant. He can be the guy that's going to be in charge of everything, but he's nothing more than a servant until he becomes an adult. He's under tutors and governors until the father himself appoints him to be the governor, the heir, the prince, the king. And he goes on to say, even so, when we were children, we're in bondage under the elements of the world. And then we get to verse 4, and this is the verse for this prophecy. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son. That's a capital S. God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. Now, what do we know about Jesus Christ? He was subject to the law, was he not? Yes, he was. He fulfilled the law in every jot and tittle. But when the fullness of time was come, then God sent him to us. And why was he sent? Verse 5 tells us that. To redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons, which is what Paul was writing about to the Galatians there in chapters 3 and 4. And so that's the first prophecy from the Bible that I would bring to you. That is, that the very Son of God, Jesus Christ the Messiah, would be the seed of a woman. And we see that in both the Old and the New Testament, in Genesis 3:15 and in Galatians 4:4.